all of the films that I programmed for this inaugural festival are classics, and It Came from Outer Space really is, if you can rank it, it is a cut above in terms of its entertainment value and its historical significance. Once again, it was directed by Jack Arnold, who, I mean, we could retitle this festival the Jack Arnold Retrospective to a certain degree. Universal, 1953, it starred Richard Carlson, Barbara Rush, who unfortunately couldn't be here today, Charles Drake, Joe Sawyer, Russell Johnson, who many of you remember from Gilligan's Island, and also a young actress who it's been my pleasure to be a dear friend for many years, who has joined us here today. Please welcome the ever lovely, the ever talented Miss Kathleen Hughes. Who's with us today. I remarked to someone that asked me outside the theater, they said, does Miss Hughes want to see the movie? I said, there is no one I have ever met that loved being an actress more than Kathy. Yes, she wants to see the movie.
In fact, I saw it last week on Me TV. One of my children called me and said, "You're going to be on Me TV at 10 o'clock.
Oh yeah, that's the Svengoolie. That's
so I watched.
That's right. Now, the part itself wasn't very big, but I know there's a story behind that because you really wanted to be in this movie. Tell us about that.
Well, when Universal decided to make a 3D movie, first they wanted to test the 3D cameras. And since I was very three-dimensional,
and still are.
they asked if I would mind. They wanted me to wear a bathing suit and walk back and forth on a runway while they tested the cameras. So I said, sure, why not? And that's why there was that little piece of film at the very end, in the end credits. That was from the test of the 3D cameras. So after I did this, I said, well, could I see the script? And they said, well, there's nothing in it for you. It's already been cast. And I said, well, I'd love to see the script. So I read the script, and there was that tiny little part. And I said, well, I could play that. And they said, but you just finished a lead. You can't do such a little part. And I said, but it's in 3D. And I finally wore them down. And they said, well, all right. If you really want to do it, you can have the part.
Was the premiere a big deal? I mean, in reading about this movie, it was kind of a big deal. It was very successful. Do you remember going to a premiere of any
No,
kind?
I don't think they had one.
No,
I don't think so.
No. I remember reading an interview with Jack Arnold, and in the 3D at the beginning when the rocket ship blows up, and then there's the subsequent, and the rocks were falling, and the audience was screaming and reacting to all of that. And you did see a lot of that gimmickry when Charles Drake reached for the gun that was hanging on the hook and pulling it down, and then went on this riff of more people die at 92 degrees and all of that. It was kind of just to get that done. So do you think did it do anything for your career, or this was just something that you wanted to do more than anything else?
Well, I wanted to work as much as possible. I had just been signed by Universal. I had already been under contract to Fox. Mm-hmm. And I had made 11 films or 12 films at 20th Century Fox. Mm-hmm. And then I somehow ended up at Universal, and I had done a film called...
For Men, was that...
No,
not For Men Only?
Because of For Men Only with Paul Henreid, which was later called The Total Lie, that's how I ended up at Universal. Universal saw the film, and they signed me from that. Mm-hmm. But
you were kind of, that For Men Only, did that kind of type you as kind of the saucy bad girl. I mean, you weren't
Yeah.
bad in this, but you kind of made people in the audience want to know what your phone number was. Did that for men only kind of get you into that niche of being a bad girl and doing those types of parts?
Well, definitely. Certainly none of the films I did at 20th Century Fox, but
Yeah.
of course I was even younger then.
Yeah.
I was a teenager when I started at Fox.
Yeah. We had you out here for Roadhouse. You were in a bowling alley, and then there was, I
Yes.
think, Mr. Belvedere Goes to College with Clifton Webb, and a number of those kind of ingenue teenage roles. But once you got into the bad girl part, I know you liked those types of parts, right?
Oh, yes. In fact, I was not good at playing straight parts. I just couldn't do it.
Yeah.
I needed to have something a little different to do.
Like trying to seduce Edward G. Robinson.
Yeah.
In the class web and so forth. But your career really started, you were born in Hollywood, and you had a very famous uncle. Tell us about that.
Oh, well, my uncle was F.U. Herbert, and he wrote Kiss and Tell, what were some of The Moon is Blue.
The Moon is Blue,
yes.
that's right. Thank
And
you.
so I sort of grew up visiting movie sets. My uncle would take my two cousins and me to sets of pictures that he had written, and I just loved being on the sets and watching the filming, and it was always a lot of fun. And then I decided that I really wanted to be an actress because of that.
Now, didn't your uncle also have a radio show at one time?
Oh,
Yeah.
yes. There was a radio show at CBS called Meet Corliss Archer. And she's just 15, but she'll love you forever if you pretend you think she's much, much older.
That sounds like
Anyway.
a slightly risque show.
So my cousins and I all wanted that part. But of course, Janet Waldo, who was a wonderful actress, she got the part, and we were all very jealous, and we used to go to CBS every week and watch them doing the radio show.
Right. Now, your name was not used. What was your actual name, and when and why did you change it?
This is funny. When I was signed under my legal birth name, which was Betty von Gherkin. And the studio said, "You can't have a name like that. You're going to have to find another name." Well, so I ended up with Kathleen Hughes, maybe because my mother's name was Kathleen and my uncle's name was Hugh, F.U. Herbert.
Right.
So, in no time, very short time after that, along came Betsy von Furstenberg.
You were ahead of your time. They just didn't know it, right?
And nobody made her change her name.
Now, as far as it came from outer space, what do you remember about? Let's start with Jack Arnold. Was he seemed to be a guy that really knew his business, knew his stuff with actors and so on and so forth. How did he work with you?
Oh, he was a joy to work with. He was just wonderful.
Yeah.
Really enjoyed it.
Yeah. And it was a brief appearance, but do you have any recollection? Richard Carlson, who's we just saw last night, Creature from the Black Lagoon and so forth. He was really a pretty dynamic guy as far as he went into producing and writing. Someone that worked with him said that he was okay. He could kind of be a little full of himself. But any recollections of Richard Carlson?
Well, I met him because of my uncle. I met him, I guess, when I was still a teenager. My uncle was a good friend of the Carlsons, and he used to take my cousins and me over to their house. So I saw him a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And I just thought he was gorgeous.
So he wore well on you.
Yes.
He wore well on you.
Yes.
Of course, it came from outer space, gave birth to what I read that you termed, or you told me, the picture that will not die.
Oh.
That picture has literally followed you and has been around for years. I mean, at any point did you kind of wonder, when is this ever going to end? Because it hasn't.
Oh, I hope it never does. We were in the photo department, or whatever you call it, and they were doing ad stills, and of course my ad still had nothing to do with my part in the film, but they said, you know, throw up your hands and scream. And this picture has been used for so many things. It has been used to advertise hummus, flavor that screams.
Birthday cards, banners,
Oh, yes.
Everything.
One of my cousins was in Canada, and she saw my picture on a birthday card.
It's really phenomenal, and I have to tell you, your Stanley, and by the way, for those of you that are not familiar with Kathy, she's been here many, many times, and her husband, the late great Stanley Rubin, who produced The Narrow Margin and wrote Decoy and The Presence Analyst, probably the nicest person I've ever met in my entire life, and we miss him a lot. But we were at the dinner one time, and this whole thing about the picture came up, and we were talking, and Stanley said, you know, he said it was on everything, but he said, I finally called my lawyer when I saw my wife's picture on a brand of condom. And he said, that's when I drew the line. He said, that was enough. He said, I called my attorney after that, and that particular use of her picture went away. I had to do that.
I don't mind.
So as you went on in at Universal and playing some of these parts, I know one of the pictures that we showed here, not necessarily a Universal picture, a Bel Air picture by Howard Koch, Three Bad Sisters.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, you had fun with that one, didn't you?
I love that.
Yeah.
I was the baddest of the Three Bad Sisters. That was a lot of fun.
Yeah. Well, you got the horsewhip Marla English,
Yeah.
who you were acting with. It was actually a pillow, but you really looked like you enjoyed that.
Oh, I did.
And you know, being under contract, and we talked a little bit with Julie Adams about this, and other contemporaries. You know, the studio did take care of you, you know, as far as wardrobe and premieres and all of that, along with the nice weekly salary. But then you had the publicity department that would kind of release these harebrained things. Like I talked to you, there was one where they wanted to get a defecting MiG pilot. So they said if a MiG pilot defects, he'll get engaged to Kathleen or something. What was that all about?
Oh, it just said that I would go out.
Oh, you would date him.
Date
Okay.
him.
Oh,
Yeah. And I was so embarrassed because they didn't even ask me. They just did it. It was embarrassing.
Yeah. And another one of your pictures that I'm fond of, Cult of the Cobra.
Oh,
and we have to
yes.
show that here in future years. And
Oh,
that was the one where
oh.
Faith Demerg turns into a snake and starts
Yeah.
stalking you and all of that. And didn't the studio make up some nonsense that they said you were late or something when you were ill or something like that? I mean, they could be real kind of not nice.
They could be awful. They could be really, really awful. And I got the flu while we were making the picture, and I was deathly ill. I mean, really, really, really. And they knew I was. And I just had to stay home in bed for a couple of days because I was too sick to be around people. And when I came back to work, I found out that they had written that I had held up production because of my selfishness in refusing to come into work.
Oh my God.
I just couldn't understand why they could be so mean. I mean, it wasn't my fault.
That was probably the director, someone trying to deflect blame. And the other thing is, didn't you also do when they made, now you and Stanley got married in 1954.
Yes.
And the family, the children started coming, but then when, what was it, when Peyton Place went on the air. Tell that story.
Oh, yeah. I was pregnant with my youngest child, and I started working on Peyton Place. I guess I was playing a nurse. And then I had the baby, and a week later I called the studio and I said, well, I'm ready to come back to work. And they sent me a script, and in the script, Dorothy Malone had just had a baby. My son was like a week old. So I said, well, I have the perfect baby here. And I'm going to have to bring him to the studio anyway because I'm breastfeeding. And they said, well, we'll send the social worker over to take a look at him. So the social worker came over, took a picture of my little week-old baby, and he got the part. And he had the part for just over a year. And
Did he get like a Screen Actors Guild, a little card? Or?
they were so mean. They treated him as an extra because they didn't want to have to pay him. So, I mean, I think he got the pay of an extra.
Yeah, so he just got the scale pay and nothing.
Yeah. And he was an important part of Peyton Place.
Sounds like something to be taken up at the next union negotiation. Absolutely.
And
now, I'm sorry, go ahead. Go ahead.
And he's hardly worked since.
And I know you kept, as you raised your family and children, you did keep working, and you had a really good part that got cut out of a movie, Ironweed, where you were there, and it was I want to say slightly risque, but it wasn't risque. It was really dirty, and it was great. Talk about that part that unfortunately ended up getting cut out.
Yeah. Well, this was really something. Jack Nicholson recommended me to casting. I had never met Jack Nicholson, and he recommended me for another part, a very straight parts that I don't like to play. And so I read the book or the script or whatever, and there was this part called The Hot Lady. And this was a horny lady that liked to have sex in her basement with the junk man. When the junk man would come by. And the junk man gave, what's his name? Jack Nicholson.
Right.
A ride on his junk cart and said, I'm going to stop at this house and have sex with this hot lady in the basement, and she likes an audience, so if you'd like to come and look through the window, please feel free to come and watch. And so I said, well, I'd really like to audition for that part. And I got the part. Shot the part, and saw the part in the dailies. I sat there with Meryl Streep and Jack Nicholson, and I watched my scene. That was the only time I would ever see it because it was not in the picture. But it sure was fun doing it.
That's great. When you met Stanley, Stanley was really I don't know, to coin the phrase, quite a catch. And you met him, I think, when he was working on A River of No Return.
No.
No, he was done with that.
Yeah.
Oh, you tell the story.
Oh, no.
Talk about, tell me about how you met Stanley and how that, I mean, Stanley, one of the times we had dinner together and we were sitting around talking, and somehow I mentioned, we were talking about film noir. Yeah, who would have thought that, huh? And I mentioned Gloria Graham. And you and Stanley looked at one another and smiled, and he said, should I tell him that? And she said, of course. He said, oh, and then Stanley says, oh, I was dating Gloria Graham back in that day, and of course I went like that, and he said, easily the most neurotic woman I've ever dated. But at any rate, Stanley was quite a catch, and tell the story about your courtship, because I think it's cute.
You mean about how he kept inviting me out?
Yes.
Down. Yeah, I met him, he was at Universal, and I would see him at lunchtime. I was sitting at one end of the commissary, he was sitting at the other end, and I knew that he was going to be producing some pictures there, so I would sort of smile sweetly at him. And then he started asking me out, and I didn't want to go out with him, I just wanted to part in one of his pictures. And then I was at a party with an actor friend of mine, and this actor friend introduced me to Stanley, and I said, how do you do? And then I turned around to see if there was anybody interesting at the party. I had no idea that this was the man I was going to marry. And I'm trying to think, should I tell the part about Palm Springs and meeting this girl?
Go ahead, you're on a roll. Palm Springs, I mean, come on.
Yeah, so I went to the film festival in South America, and I got deathly ill, food poisoning. And when I got back to LA, I was too sick to go to the studio, so I thought I'll just go to Palm Springs and lie in the sun, something I don't do anymore.
Yeah, me neither.
Anyway, I was sitting at the edge of the pool at the Biltmore Hotel, which I guess isn't here anymore, and a girl came and sat next to me. And it turns out that she was in, what was it? No.
Not Narrow
Was
Mars.
it?
Was it one of Stanley's pictures?
I guess it was River of No Return.
Okay.
Yeah, it was.
Okay.
Anyway, so we were sitting talking by the pool, and, do you know so-and-so? Do you know so-and-so? And she said, do you know Stanley Rubin? And I said, well, sort of. I said, he's asked me out, but I turned him down. And she said, you turned him down? You're crazy. This is the nicest man in Hollywood. So I said, well, gee. If you bump into him, tell him to ask me out again. And I'll go out with him.
Mm-hmm.
So in no time, he called me, and he invited me to dinner and to go to Fox and see an answer print of River of No Return. So that sounded wonderful. So I said, sure. He came to the door to pick me up, and this is somebody that I just, didn't think much about. When I went to the door and saw him standing there, it was like I was hit by lightning. And if he had said, I've changed my mind, why don't we go get married instead? I would have said, yes, of course. The sooner the better. And actually, we were married 2 months later.
Wow.
For almost 50 years.
50 years. So as you look back, are you still waiting for the phone to ring? You're still waiting for a part? Because as I said, there's no one I know that enjoys acting more than you. Are you're still ready, willing, and able with your two knees to take it?
I would love to be in more pictures. I would love it.
I think we
The
would.
parts would be a little different,
Just a little bit. Just a little bit.
but I would love it.
Well, I think, Kathy, we would love it too. We just love the fact that you were here and we got to show this movie and everyone got to enjoy you. And it's so good to see you again because it's been a while for both of us. So thank you, and put it together for Kathy. Thank you.